Hello, everyone. Welcome back to JP Talks, our second episode, continuing it on with Patricia and Leslie McCurdy. Today we'll be discussing around activism again, along with our focus on the civil rights movement. So actually, no, not just the civil rights movement. We're also getting a all-around perspective of activism in Canada and the United States. We have Audra Gray, our series creator. We also have Tanya Sutherland, who is head of archives and research. Hello. We have our third member of our team, which was in the last episode, Catherine McDonald, head of research.
Hi, great to be here.
And then...
And education.
And education. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And education. And then Neely McCurdy.
Hi, everyone.
And Leslie McCurdy.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So one of the first questions that we'll get into. So this is for Patricia. Where did you grow up? What was your family like, and were they activists?
I grew up in Ypsilanti, Michigan. My family was two girls and two boys. My mother was Canadian. My father was American from the South. And they were both activists of a sort at that time, because it was just right after the recession in the middle 30s.
Both of you, how did your experience with racism change as you grew up throughout your life? And did it also change based on your location?
Is that for me?
As for anyone anyone answer.
Well, my experience of racism as I was growing up as a child, there wasn't very much of it. And we lived in an all-Black neighborhood. So everyone around us was Black. And we lived close to a white neighborhood, and they were very friendly to us at that time. I went to all-white grade school, and that was the first time I was the only one in the class that was Black. The students sometimes were a little annoyed because I was there, but the teachers as a whole were all very good, and they would make sure everybody was comfortable in the classrooms. As I went into high school, in the city that I lived in, there was a Black high school and a Black grade school and a white grade school, and they all came together in high school. So the mixture was good at that time, and everyone seemed to get along fairly well because sports was a big thing in high school. And my brothers were both in sports, and I was in a band, which was the drum and bugle corps in the high school, and a very celebrated group in Ypsilanti. And I was the first Black member of the drum and bugle corps. Things changed as I went to university, because there, at that time, I went in when they were just starting to open up the universities to Black students. That is the major universities in the States. And the students were fine because there were students there from all over the world, but there was problems with the teachers at that point. But everything seemed to not be too contentious, because at that time sports was a big thing, and most of the sports players were Black, and they were in all the different sports, and everybody was interested in sports at that time. So as far as growing up with a lot of racism, there wasn't too much at that point. It happens more when you get out of university and want to go into the workplace. Then the doors are not open to you, even though you have come out with a profession, and different places will treat you in different ways.
Interesting.
So could I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
So, you said that there were problems with teachers. And so I'm wondering what that looked like. Was it like in terms of racism there were issues with teachers?
Yes. Some teachers would, you have a chance to go and talk to your teachers afterwards if there's some things that you don't understand. And some of the teachers wouldn't explain things as well to the Black students as they did to the white students. And in some of the courses that I took, even though I worked very hard to get an A, because in high school I was an A student and came in with A's and came in with a scholarship, I lost my scholarship because some of the teachers would only give you the grade of C, because they felt that Black people weren't able to obtain higher grade averages.
And as you say that, I'm just wondering about parallels to our educational system and how the whole streamlining situation within our education system, and how there are similarities in the way things kind of unfolded in terms of treatment to students. I don't know, because Catherine, you teaching, I don't know if you've seen any similarities or anything like that. We're talking Chicago, right? But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if.
Well, certainly, gosh, in terms of racism involved with streaming, certainly the sort of educational rationale was that students would be frustrated if they weren't getting enough specific attention, if they were struggling. So that's why they sectioned them off into different courses like that. But it's, I personally did not see a lot of that in the schools that I taught, that it was racially based. And I always, when I did teach what's called applied level classes, I always tried to look at students in high school are very restless as well. Very often they don't settle down. I had 4 brothers who all dropped out of school in high school, later on went back. And I think particularly boys were sort of disadvantaged in some of the traditional classes and stuff like that. And I always made a point of kind of making sure kids didn't get buried into those classes without an opportunity to work at the advanced level, and try to get as many of them to move up to that area. But it has become a problem. I know I've got friends who teach in the Detroit system, and they see that the students are streamed and are not encouraged to hope to have aspirations beyond, going to the world of work, in the world of work programs and things like that. Then there's the sort of college level programs, then university bound. So I know it is a problem in our school system. Yeah, for sure.
Right. And go ahead, Leslie, because I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Interesting, because right now I'm on a delegation of women right here in Windsor that's going to go speak to the Board of Education. Mm-hmm. And as a preamble to part of my presentation with the board, I actually have quoted stuff from documents that my mother provided to me from when she was a member of the Black Heritage Club here in Windsor. I forget exactly what the name of their committee was, but they were doing the same thing. They were going to the boards of education to try to get the education desegregated so that they were teaching Black history and to quote unquote sensitize teachers and the education system to the needs of Black children. And we're meeting on Thursday with the first of the local boards about that exact same thing. And I'd like to go back to some things. I'd like to go back because by contrast to my mother, I grew up in an all-white neighborhood, predominantly white neighborhood. My parents, being that they were both educated and professionals, moved us into a neighborhood where successful people who had decent economic background lived, i.e. white neighborhoods. And so we did not necessarily have the community of Black people around us to support us. We were faced with racism quite often, even just our friends with things, casually, people coming and saying casually that my mom said that you are an N-word, that kind of thing. And police coming when there was any disturbance, and it was us that the police would be checking when it would be the other people that started the disturbance. And the times my mother could tell of one and I could tell of one where after just being around in our neighborhood, the police came by the house to, because people saw suspicious Black children in the neighborhood, our own neighborhood. What made a difference for me was the fact that my mother took us to the United States for a year while she was working on her master's degree. And I actually went to school at Everett High School in Lansing, Michigan, that had a substantial Black population. And it was really different to be in an environment with other Black people my own age, peers and stuff that I could relate to, that I could talk to about, some of the issues about being Black. I mean, there were actually Black clubs to deal with those kinds of things in the school that I went to over there. But yeah, it was a very different experience and a difficult experience. And I would say that part of the reason that we overcame some of the prejudice in the school system, and it still exists. I mean, even in part of my presentation, I note that when a Black child has a problem in school, they keep coming up with problems to fix the Black child. They don't come up with ideas to fix the school system. It's not inclusive of history that, or literature or representation that Black child can relate to use as mentoring and role modeling and that kind of stuff. And I kind of lost track of part of what I was saying. But having been in the States, gave me more of a sense of myself and more peers to work with. And then going to university, I went to the University of Michigan. And in the States, they have quote unquote opportunity programs. And it was assumed that because I was a Black student on campus, that I was there because of affirmative action. And that in some way my grades were not up to par and that I was being allowed in to give an opportunity. Whereas, I got in, I busted A's to get into school and maintain them while I was there. My parents helped pay for my education. I got a little bit of scholarship stuff, but I wanted to be an artist and they don't give that stuff to artists. And there were even people that claimed that, my family must be rich if they were sending me to school to be an artist. And that was an attitude of Black children at the university because most of them are sent to school to get a career, a job that will support them. They don't necessarily have the luxury, a lot of them, of aspiring to be something as flaky as an artist or as potentially non-income providing as an artist. So I was faced with quite different experiences than my mom coming through school, and having my mom and my father as parents, because they definitely were civil rights activists, prominently so across Canada, meant that I grew up just knowing or absorbing civil rights and activism as part of what one does as one grows up and enters adulthood.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like you got kind of frustration on both sides, both the Black community and the white community, where...
Yeah, in some parts, especially because we grew up in an affluent community. A lot of the Black community downtown actually, they thought that we were too good for them. And really, a lot of times we were just, nervous because we didn't know them. they weren't necessarily our community. We didn't grow up with them. We would see them from time to time, and we would hang out with some other Black children that were kids of my mom's friends or colleagues in the work that she was doing. And we had cousins when we were really small, but at one point, my great-grandparents in Amherstburg died, and when they were around, it seemed like at least we had our family unit. But after they died, the McCurdy family dispersed all over the place, and we didn't even have that family unit any longer to hold on to. So my siblings and I became quite close, and my mom, she always complains that, we're always real close and we leave her out, but that closeness amongst us siblings is really how we survived.
That's good.
In school, when I was growing up, a lot of the families were, the Black families were the children of professionals. Actually, my mother was a college graduate. She graduated from Normal College in Ypsilanti. And my aunt, her sister, graduated also, and she was a nurse. And my father, coming from North Carolina, only had 11th grade education, but that was good for coming from the South at that time. And he went on to take courses to become an electrician, and actually became one of the first electricians in Ypsilanti at that time. My grandfather, who came from Canada, became a beekeeper and had his own business and was the first lamp lighter in the city of Ypsilanti. A lot of the people in the Black community, their parents were professionals. They were doctors, there was lawyers, there were dentists, there were ministers. Now, these were some of the professions after slavery, during Jim Crow, that Black people could go into in their own areas, because they were segregated in the South and in the United States. But they became professionals. They didn't have a chance to become business people or have access to capital as white people did, but they could have their own business, and they could have their own profession, and start working with people within the community on that. There were also, let's say, steel workers and or ironsmiths, because a lot of them in the South were blacksmiths, and they put shoes on the horses, and they were masons, stone masons, because they had sorority, like a sorority. It was the Masons who fought for education for Blacks and promoted more of the Black people going into the trades and being able to take care of themselves after slavery.
Is it fraternity you mean, Mom? Like Fraternal Order of Masons? Isn't that what it is?
Yes, the Fraternal Order of Masons.
Okay. So based on all of this experience, like your upbringing, how you experienced racism, or how you experienced community even within the Black community, what was it, a particular like person or moment or issue that kind of motivated you to become involved in the movement?
My mom.
No, well, my dad came from the South, and he would tell us about racism. He told us about, let's say, the colored drinking fountains, the colored restrooms. You have to get off the sidewalk if a white person walked by. And he was sort of disappointed that we didn't go to the all-black school because they taught Black history. And that was one of the things that helped the Black communities in the States, is that they did know who they were and they knew their history. And he told us about Marcus Garvey and a lot of the other Black leaders at that time that we didn't know anything of. And even though we were going to white schools, we felt proud of who we were. And we weren't ashamed to be called Negro or Black. But it wasn't until I came to Canada that I found out that this wasn't the same thing. In Canada, the people wanted to be called colored. They didn't want to be Black. And they didn't want to be Negro. So, but they grew. It was a progression from colored to Negro to Black, but it came over a period of time being in the civil rights movement that they began to see the difference. Because in Canada, there were fewer Black people, and when they came up against racism, they didn't have anywhere to go. While in the States, you had all sorts of organizations. You had the NAACP, which I was a part of while I was in university. And growing up too, you had different groups and clubs that Black children were in. I was a Girl Scout. And in Canada, I don't remember any Girl Scouts for the kids to go in. Did you go into Girl Scouts?
Remember when I was a brownie and you called me the only real brownie in the bunch? Hello?
Oh, okay.
I have to say that my mother probably set me on the path of doing what I do now, because she set us on our course of early activism by always sending us to do projects at school that had Black themes. Like when we had to do history projects. I remember one time I had to do a history project, and the project was to do a diary based on your Pilgrim ancestors coming to Canada. And so, you know, I did mine about my ancestors coming on the Underground Railroad and setting up a homestead and having it stolen from them by cheating, white people. And so I was already going to schools and telling these stories about the truth in history, even as a youngster, because my mother would have us research that stuff. And that is actually how I first discovered Harriet Tubman. His mom mentioned Harriet Tubman to us, and I was actually having a contest with a friend of mine to see which of us could read the most books in the school library over the course of the year. And I was going to the school at night grabbing books, and I found this book, Harriet Tubman, Conductor on the Underground Railroad, and I was in love with her ever since that time. Because Mom had mentioned it. Mom had mentioned a lot of other people that we would do projects about in school and stuff. So, I mean, I guess my early activism and the seeds to my career came from my mom at that time.
Wow.
Well, being in a school where they were the only Black child, sometimes they'd come home and ask questions, why are they white? So I had a map of Africa, and I showed them this map of Africa and told them that this is where we came from, not Europe. And then I gave them some of the history of Africa, and how Africa was the birth of all mankind, and told them about the big dynasties of Africa and some of the kings and queens of Africa, the gold trade of Africa, and the housing, and on all sorts of things that they would never have privy to if they were just sitting in the classroom in their schools.
We had all kinds of books. I mean, some of my favorite books, I just stole one of my favorite books back from one of my cousins, and it was the Black ABCs. And at one time we had it all memorized. A is for Africa, land of the sun, king of the continents, the ancient one. B is for books, where readers find food for the heart, soul, and mind. And it went on and on and on. And then I remember Mom had, because one of the topics I'm dealing with the delegation is how the literature in the schools are very representative, and how that's a really easy place to start in libraries, in providing literature that's reflective, or even in school, as you're teaching kids to read, you can use books that have anti-racist themes and that are representative of all of the races and backgrounds of kids that are in them. And it's really easy to make those choices to do that if they have the will to do that. But I think that's the basis of all my stuff comes, I'll go back again to saying it's all from my mom. That's where it was seated, and watching my dad, but my mom was there with us, pushing us. So yeah, that's what I have to say. Mama San, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it's awesome though. I saw Favor, and Favor's like, yes, I forgot.
I've been doing a lot of research and a lot of involvement with pre-colonial African history. So like as I'm reading as you're saying all of this, I'm like, yes. Just eating it up.
Part of me is just like, well, because my background is, directly, my parents are from Jamaica, right? And then they came here. But man, it would have been so cool just growing up, having just an understanding of how you connected to the diaspora within the country in which we live. Like that would have been I think a totally different experience than it would have been, because we felt I felt so displaced.
Well, yeah.
Partially because I knew about my parents' history a bit, in so much as they knew, right? Coming from Jamaica, and I was very much connected to that culture, but we weren't living in Jamaica, we were living in Canada, right? So anyways, that's all I'm saying. It would have been a different experience, I think, having that history.
Well, I found when I came to Canada, let's say after the civil rights movement in the States, when I was in the NAACP, when there were the big marches and the work with SNCC and Martin Luther King Jr. Coming to Canada, it was quite different because there were no big organizations at that time to join, and the people in Canada didn't have the same feeling about who they were. And this is when I think what started me moving to Amherstburg, Ontario, when I first came here, to get involved with the young people, because they were running around calling each other the N-word in the park, instead of realizing that this was not something you call each other.
Wait,
so
just to be clear, so other Blacks were calling Blacks
yes,
N-word.
yes.
And around what time period is this?
Late 1950s, early 60s.
Oh, so we started way back then. It wasn't rap music. You know what I'm saying? We started. Oh, okay.
This is something my mom put together. Mm-hmm. It was a Black History exhibit that was here in Windsor. It's the precursor to what's called now the Freedom Museum, that was the North American Black Historical Museum in Amherstburg that my cousin Max Simpson set up. This was done in 1965. I was 4 years old. I remember this display. I remember seeing it at the university, how strongly I was impacted upon by the works of my parents. Wow. I remember marching in 1963 in Detroit when Martin Luther King was there. I must have been 2. What I remember is no one would take me to the bathroom, but I was there. Strongly I was impacted upon by the things that my parents were doing. And my mother, I'm looking, she handed me this folder of stuff. I'm going to go through it. she's freaking phenomenal, man. She's been quietly doing all this stuff and no one's really paid attention because, you know, my dad was the great Dr. Howard Douglas McCurdy. But here's this fabulous female, her story being overlooked. So, you know, I just want to put that out there.
We should tag all the journalists and production houses on this episode.
Well, I met Howard McCurdy when I was at Michigan State University, and he was quite notable because being a young Black man, he was working on his PhD, and there were few Black men at that time working on their doctor's degree. When we joined the NAACP, he, being quite knowledgeable and an ardent reader, he became the president. And from that point, he showed that he had, good leadership qualities. And when, after we were married and moved to Canada, he was discriminated against on a golf course. And at that point, he told me before we came to Canada that there was no discrimination in Canada. Canada was God's country. But we found out very quickly that God's country had a lot of discrimination. And he, at that point, was involved in politics and education because he was a professor at the University of Windsor. Being well connected, it was easy for him to get people in the city on his side. This is the white population who didn't know that there was all of this discrimination going on. And we formed what was called the Guardian Club. And this Guardian Club, the mission of the Guardian Club was to eliminate overt discrimination throughout the city of Windsor and surrounding areas. So we formed testing groups with the Black and the whites, and led by the Human Rights Commission from Toronto, which Dan Hill was the head of at that time. And there were two lawyers, Alan Borovoy and Saul Nosenchuk of Windsor, who worked with the group to make sure that we were doing everything that was according to the Human Rights Code, and that we could convict the people who were discriminating, openly discriminating. There were signs that you couldn't go into some restaurants, you couldn't go on the beach, and you couldn't go into some recreational areas and service areas. And this was very discouraging because in the States, we were there we had just knocked out most of this type of discrimination, and then to run back into Canada and find it's there, but there was no group to fight it as there was in the States. So the Guardian Club fought this through work situations, as the early settlers who came over on the Underground Railroad did have their own little community for a while and had their own little businesses, but in the next generation, everything diminished until came that the only thing that Black people had, they no longer had their settlements, they no longer had their churches. The church changed to the British American Church from the African American Church, and people couldn't find places to live except in the city because the settlements that they had, some of the white extremists from the States came over and took the land that the people were given in Canada in the settlements by Queen Victoria and some of the other people who helped them develop their own settlements for farming and their own little business productions at that time. So this was all taken away, and they were forced into the cities as usual, and there was nothing in the cities but factories. They couldn't get the factory jobs. So Canadians were going down worse than the people in the United States at that time, because in the United States, they were on their way up because more of them were becoming educated, and especially the men, because they had a chance to go to the Army. And in the Army, after serving 2 years in the Army, you could go into universities and get an education. And I don't know whether this was true in Canada or not, but it didn't happen in Canada. And there weren't as many, the population wasn't as large, so there wasn't enough to really fight this discrimination that was coming up. But this, the Guardian Club helped the people to realize that with the backing of the Human Rights Commission and with people wanting to move forward, they could do it. So they changed their name from colored to Negro, because one of the things that was an outgrowth of the Guardian Club was the Negro History exhibit at the University of Windsor, which that pamphlet that Leslie was showing you was one of the designs that I did for that committee, and to help to set up the displays at the University of Windsor. And the people from all around in Windsor, the Black people, began to feel proud of themselves, that they had something to show and to prove that they were people who had contributed to the area. And it just wasn't being spoken of or showed. It was all in their family exhibits and hidden away. But now they could put all of this into display and show the hard work that they had done in forming settlements and what they did to contribute to Canada at that point in time.
Oh.
I gotta ask this question, just what was the issue around colored versus Black? Like why did people feel that they needed to call themselves colored?
Well,
because in the what happened, Canadians were fair skin, while most of the Americans were dark skinned.
not all. There was
Not
a lot.
all of them. No.
It was. You know what it was? I heard kids say it. Because they weren't Black like them jungle bunnies from Africa and Jamaica. That's what Canadians think. They were not Black like those African jungle bunnies. That's
No, wait. These are other colored people who said that about Black people.
What happens is that the information that you got when you were in Canada, you were isolated from the information that you were getting in the States. And when I first came here, within the Guardian Club, it was good because we had the Black diaspora. We had people from Africa, from Jamaica, and from all the islands, at that time. and the people from the Underground Railroad.
Mhm.
And at first, they did not get along because they didn't trust each other. As Leslie said, probably some of them called each other names and so forth. And as I mentioned before, people coming from the States had a better concept of who they were as people. People from the islands all had a good concept of who they were as Black people. People from Africa had no doubt. They were good people and they were productive people. But the Canadians had been brainwashed, no education, and the only thing that they had is they were more light-skinned, and it became a light-skinned, good hair sorority instead of being people who produced and were worthy of something. The culture, the white culture, debased them, and that's what had happened. And coming up under the name of Negro and then Black brought more pride and made them feel, like real human beings again.
They had a saying. It went light, bright, almost like white. And that was the most valuable, the more valuable people of the community were light, bright, almost like white. And people, and still, people would tend to marry. They would marry light-skinned people or white people so that their children purposefully would be lighter skinned. That was like part of the process, part of the goal, to get rid of the Blackness that they were ashamed of.
And that still goes.
You're on mute. Sorry.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say that still goes on. I mean, the whole issue of colorism, right?
Right.
Still happens today. Bleaching still happens today. Sorry.
Yes.
Some people call it color struck now.
Pardon?
I said some people call it color struck. So someone's color struck.
Yeah, that's normal.
If you want to be with someone as light as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel the brain, I relate a lot to the brainwashing. I feel like because my parents coming from the continent, immigrating here, already knew their history. And then so they taught all of that history onto me. And so, but then, with certain microaggressions that experienced in school, being the only Black kid, but also having to deal with everyone else's perception of, my home or back home. There was a lot of that. I started kind of believing the same things that they were saying. So there was this one time where I got in trouble for defending my country after someone kind of used it as an example as to why you should appreciate food. So there was this one teacher, while we were having snack time or whatever, use me as an example as to why we should appreciate food. She said, countries where Faven's from, they don't have food, they're in poverty. And I was like, and then so I said, no, that's not it. Or I specifically said, I don't like that. That's not, my country's not poor. And then I got in trouble for speaking against my teacher.
Was this in Toronto?
Yeah, so I got in trouble for speaking against my teacher. And so there's a lot of that, like, not brainwashing, but kind of through microaggressions, you're kind of being taught that you're not as, where you're from is not as good or not as best as blessed. So that's just from my perspective. But yeah, so then how does the current protest movement then compare and contrast to the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 50s? What were the greatest gains from the civil rights movement from that era?
Well, from the 60s and 70s, 50s and 60s and 70s, I'd say the greatest gains were that Black people began to, in the States especially, began to own property or have their own areas and began to open business because they moved from the South to the North. And as I said, my grandfather, who was in Canada moved from Canada to the States because after not the Civil War, but after
Reconstruction?
yeah, after Reconstruction, no, not Reconstruction, the period when everybody was out of work, the stock market. Depression. After the Depression, they lost their farms and they had to move to the city. And in the cities were all white and they couldn't get jobs. So they left and went back to the States. In the States, they began to own their own businesses. And that brought a middle class of Black people that did not exist in Canada at that time. And this was a strong middle class. And you see now how this middle class has worked when you see the John Lewises and what the things that he did and the groups around him and how they moved into politics so that they became decision makers in many areas. While in Canada, there weren't any Blacks in politics, except, what was his name? Alexander.
Lincoln
Alexander became one. And then later, Howard McCurdy became one. And then more of the people who came from the islands began to go into politics. And that brought up the more interest in civil rights at that point.
Mom?
Yes.
Wouldn't you say, though, that compared to the United States, in the United States, the civil rights movement remained basically a fight for Black rights, whereas in Canada, because I know you've mentioned it sort of before about how the civil rights and the anti-Black racism movement was sort of co-opted by the multicultural movement.
Yes. Yeah.
Where they started doing the multicultural thing and paying attention to that, and then the government funding and stuff that at one time had gone to help the groups that were fighting racism, then went to these multicultural groups.
Right. Every time there was a strong movement of Black people in Canada, they neutralized it. They would change it to bring in others so that you really didn't get a full chance to fight for the Black movement, in which Black people were always at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale. And they were moving up fast, too fast for many of the racist people with the racist attitude. They didn't want Blacks in all of these areas. So when we had this movement of the civil rights movement and of to try to get Black education into the schools and so forth, and rather than making it Black education, they wanted to change it to multicultural education. And right away, that means all white people are part of multicultural societies. And that again puts the Black education at the bottom.
It kind of reminds me of the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter kind of.
Or even of mosaics and melting pot of multiculturalism, like that idea.
Yeah, multiculturalism and also assimilation.
Yeah.
But I would say in Canada, I tend to make a difference between even that melting pot idea, because in the United States, they have more of a melting pot where everybody is supposed to come in and become like American, whatever American culture is. And I say that, you know, by blending all that together, you get more of just a pea green soup. But Canada, because of the multicultural aspect, is a little bit more like a tossed salad, where all the pieces and parts and the different colors and flavors and everything are still independent parts of the whole salad. And I'll say that's where Canada's a little different from the United States, but they forgot the sauce. And the sauce is the Black people, you know, they forgot the rhythm, you know, that.
I like this metaphor.
Yeah, the spice, you know, that we forgot about everything that gives it the you know, its distinction, you know. And that's the input and the culture and the history of the Black citizens of Canada, you know. But I would say, I mean, because there's also the fight for the Native Indigenous peoples and the Asian peoples as well. But I mean, it's, you know, the Black fight is ours, and that's what happened, is that when they became multicultural, it became still European multicultural.
Right.
The British, the Germans, the Dutch, the Greek.
Exactly.
Right? And the indigenous peoples and the Asian peoples and the Black peoples who were part of the country, you know, sort of got all pushed down to the bottom. And as Mom said, always the Blacks are at the very bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
But see, still in the States, they had the culture. Black people still kept a large part of their culture, and it went into music, it went into the arts, it went into all the different facets of the community, so that there was not just a Black culture, but there was a blending. The Blacks culture was being usurped by the white culture.
Yeah, formed it and changed it. Yeah. When we were talking about multiculturalism too, because I remember my first year teaching, way back, years ago, and they had a multicultural history course. And I mean, it was very well intended. It had some really great stuff about it. But what they didn't make the distinction is between multicultural and multiracial. And I think this is really where we drop the ball on that education-wise. And you could easily get drowned out in that, because there's so many, when you saw that, I mean, it was a time period of great immigration from many countries coming into Canada.
Right.
So, and if you looked out in a classroom in front of you as a teacher, you know, you saw kids at X, Y, and, you know, from all these different backgrounds. And when you had these multicultural festivals, everybody brought their own food and different things. But it was kind of almost population based in terms of numbers in your classroom. So if you had a lot of Italian children or whatever, so it's very easy to skim over everybody. I mean, yes, it's a good, I don't want to say a token welcome to Canada, because I think it was sincere in its intent, but I think it perhaps unintentionally was not, you know, or maybe intentionally at some deep level, I don't know, was not multiracial. Because it's only more recently we're seeing huge, I mean, by the way, Leslie and Patricia, I'm working with Chantel Browning Morgan, who's amazing, and we're working on a curriculum for Jackson Park, specifically looking at Canadian civil rights through the lens of Emancipation Day as it evolved, and the challenges of each particular, I won't say decade, but years and things like that, as it went through from the 30s to the 60s in particular. And that was one of the things as well, that in terms of trying to find sources for people to talk about these experiences, these truly Canadian civil rights experiences. As a teacher, you'd want to do this stuff, but it's hard to find that stuff. It's at university level, a lot of kind of in silos there and in people's individual memories, but we'd like to bring it into the school system specifically, not just for Windsor, but right across in the compulsory grade 10 course, starting with that. So David,
like I said, I'm on the delegation with Chantel.
Yes.
Starting with the Catholic board here on Tuesday, going to talk to board members about trying to implement an anti-racism and Black history curriculum, and to get them to, like, I gave, oh my gosh, pages long list of possible reading resource materials that could be used in schools at various grade levels. They're award-winning books. They're American, they're Canadian, they're Black, they're Indigenous. They talk about, one book even talks about, normalizing single motherhood that so many Black families are a part of. So there are all kinds of things. And I basically, because I started out my presentation talking about how my mother was when she was doing this, it left off where they were going to try and resource and create the books and things to use. But now it's like there are all kinds of resources. Like they're here now. We just need the will for the board to start using them and implementing them in the curriculum. So it's not hard anymore. All you gotta do is take a look. The stuff is out there.
And we're doing very practical, actual lesson plans for teachers. So I'm not saying add water and stir, but like all the pieces are there. The research is there, the questions, that even like testing and different things like that to make it very practical to get this into the school system for teachers, plus teacher in-servicing too.
I don't have testing, but with both of my shows, my Harriet Tubman show, all three of my shows that I take in the schools, I have study guides that are prepared with lessons, history lessons, background information, all kinds of stuff. And ironically, I rarely perform here in Windsor. Even Chantel, as a teacher, rarely brings me into her schools to teach the history. So,
Oh, okay.
Like I was telling Leslie, I read in the paper of this young lady who was a PhD, and they have hired her to coach Black students in the school, those who identify Black. And to
graduate.
Pardon?
To help them graduate.
To help them graduate.
Because Black kids have trouble graduating. Another example of there's a problem, let's fix the kids, not the system.
Wait a minute, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Why should you have to help them graduate when they're in the school system and you have teachers? My take on this is that you don't help the students, you help the teachers. You get the teachers sensitized and teach them Black history so that they understand what is going on, and then they can teach in the classroom like it's one. All the students learn the same thing, and they will all want to graduate and go forth.
I have one argument though that I have about teaching Black history specifically, is it's still segregated. It still makes it seem like somehow we are other.
Well, you don't have to see just Black history.
Deeply integrated into the history of Canada to be completely appropriate and good for all of our kids, because there is still, and I've had some kids speak of it, there is still the otherism of having Black history, like somehow there's white history and that's normal, and then there's Black history. So really the push has got to be to incorporate the history as a part of the learning of Canadian history, culture, whatever. It's got to be.
That's good, but that's the same as taking the Black children and trying to coach them to graduate and like they're others. Right. They are part of the whole, and they should not have to be separated to want to graduate. They are people, and they know what they want. These young people want to graduate, but they want to be treated in the schools as they are treated, as the white kids are treated, and that they are equal, or they're not inferior people, they're superior people.
And ultimately, there has to be the integration of the system, the education and the learning in order for that to occur, so that, again, we're not segregated in our history in some way.
Well, that's why I said you have to give the teachers sensitization as well as education on Black history and Native history, or whatever other history.
That's our theme, is Black history is Canadian history, and we've got it right across the board into that grade 10 curriculum. It fits everything. Sorry, Faven, go ahead. You're trying to break in.
It's great. I gotta get through the questions. So like, as you look, pardon?
No, keep going.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, as you look back on all your involvement, right, in Canada and in the United States, is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
Pardon?
like looking back on your involvement just within the community, within the movement, is there anything that you wish you had done differently?
No, not really, because after being very involved in doing nothing but civil rights work, I took a full-time job at the college. And at that time, I was a single mother and had 4 children that I had to raise. And I developed an interior design program at St. Clair College, and became the first Black woman to develop such a program in the college system at that time, and taught it for 25 years. And during that time, I went back to school, got further education, and got master's degree. And for my master's degree, I wrote a thesis on Black architecture.
Oh, wow.
So I I studied a Black settlement in Canada, which was Buxton, Ontario. And I noticed that they built their houses different from a white settlement that was founded at the same time, at the same time zone in the mid-19th century. And the Europeans built their houses according to the European house styles, while in the Black settlement, they were very different. So my thesis was to find out what caused the difference. And I found in the research that Black builders built from the onset when they came to Canada, because they were craftsmen, and they built many of the houses in the South. And that in the New England states, when the first people came, they built like the Europeans, because they built from the memory of how they built in their country of origin. In the South, the houses began to look very different, and they were being built by people who were enslaved at that time, who were also craftsmen. And the craftsmen also built from the memory of how they built from where they came. But coming from Africa and coming from very different countries along the west coast of Africa, there was no common theme in how they built the houses, but there were common characteristics. And that's what I discovered. And I wrote a book on the houses of Buxton, a legacy of African influences in architecture. From that.
Do we have that book? Leslie, do you have that book?
That book. Mom has that book.
Do I have that book?
I was going to say, show it.
The low price of $29.99. No.
Okay.
Wait. Oh, wait.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
got
great. I think we saw that when we went to Buxton to the homecoming.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's great.
Lovely.
And I showed that these characteristics are in all of the Black settlements all around the world, throughout the whole Black diaspora. You get the same characteristics. So that's something that should be in the schools or in the colleges or whatever on Black history.
What about you, Leslie? Was there anything that you would have done different? Or no?
Well, I'm kind of still doing.
I was going
So, and I'm just getting, I'm actually becoming more powerful with my voice as I'm going, particularly in the kind of messaging that I give to kids in schools following my performances. Because I say a lot of things that teachers can't say because it is ultra curricular. And I, I'll talk about how, kids want to know why there's slavery. And I'll talk about how it's the economic system that slavery is about, and how we still have an economic system that will enslave you, and how it's important to be educated, because back in the time of enslavement, they had a saying, an educated slave is a dangerous slave. And, that if the education isn't there for them, then they can go out and seek it and teach it to others, because people who were enslaved weren't being taught their education, stuff either. They had to learn to read and write, and then they had to go out and discover their history and create those stories. And so I think that what I have sort of been doing, and I'll tell kids, that it's time to start a revolution, that it's time to change the whole monetary system, that ultimately the way to overthrow white supremacy is to throw the economics. I'm not afraid to say that in schools. So my message in schools with students is getting even more powerful and more radical. And I enjoy doing that. Some teachers, will actually sit aside and applaud with what I'm talking. Some of them will actually ask the questions that they know will lead me into that line of thing. But I'm still working to start a revolution, y'all. I'm not done. My work's not done. We haven't started a revolution. I just try to encourage the young kids of today. My generation, I guess because we just came off the civil rights movement and we were the benefactors, sort of just were placated for a while, because we were allowed to get jobs, and a certain amount of people, like Mom said, moved up into middle class existence. And in the United States, I know particularly the federal government started to do things to desegregate the federal government employment system. And so a lot of federal employees that got good money were actually Black. And so, there was a lot of progression, and people got a little pacified because they thought that the economic system had accepted them. But now we see that it's not true. Young people today are pushed even harder than people have been pushed in a long time, as far as economically, as far as expense, as far as lack of investment in their well-being and their future. And I just hope to keep encouraging them and pushing them to rebel and revolt and work to overthrow this mess. So I ain't done. Still changing.
Okay, so then this is going to be our last question, because it's 7:56 and got to wrap this up soon. So what do you think are the most important issues on the table today as far as civil rights is concerned? Like, for example, defunding the police, just calling out racism in the House of Commons, that kind of thing.
Well, I think it's a good thing that he called it out, because it's there. And at least it jolted them into either fighting back or beginning to say that they were looking at it. So at least you get something going at that point. But the biggest thing that I think in the fight today, there are two of them. Well, actually three. But education, that's one of the best things. And that is, as Leslie said, education for everybody, all through the educational system, starting out with when you go to kindergarten, nursery school, or whatever, you should start there and learn it's equal, that everybody has contributed to the society that we are a part of. And in high school, they used to have music, and they took that out. There was music. They should know where jazz came from, and they should know the island music, where that came from and what it's like. And as we learn music from Europe, and we enjoy the music that we hear. I really love classical music. And there is Black classical music, but people don't know what it is. And you learn now that poets, a lot of them are the rap poets, and they're very good. They tell the story, but people think of it as something that isn't good. And actually, if you listen to it and you listen to the stories that they're telling the plight of the people. Mm-hmm. They will begin to understand. And there's so many things that we use in the house on a daily basis that were invented by Black people. And even one of my relatives on my mother's side helped in the invention of the electric streetcar and was the first electric streetcar operator on the North American continent. And this is something that should be in the history books. And now I guess they're going to put the streetcar down on the waterfront are they putting it in a glass cage, Leslie?
They're putting it in a big concrete building, my mom.
Yes, so people could see it, and it's in the wrong place. They should
wrap it up.
Pardon? Okay. All right, but things like this, all of these things should be a part of our education because we are one, and I do believe that Black Lives Matter.
I would like to say that I think that the next big push needs to be to get into politics. Because if we are in politics, then we can be in positions where we are in the ministries of education and making those choices about what's happening in our education. That we can be in the ministries that deal with the economics and we can make those changes in economics. That we can be in those ministries where they make health decisions and we can make those decisions that impact upon our communities and stuff. So I think the big push, the most important thing right now is to get into politics and become either politically active or become very conscientious in who we are supporting and making sure that they are actually going to represent our needs and our requirements in representing us in our political halls.
Yeah, be in the place where you can make decisions and be in a position of power.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this has been a really good episode of JP Talks. I feel like we got a lot covered today.
And there's still more. I mean, anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, no, of course. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in and watching this episode. Thank you, Patricia and Leslie, for coming back and talking again.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. So, thanks for this episode of JP Talks. Tune in next time where we will be opening with other guests and working on other issues and talking about more things to further the community and further create that bridge of intergenerational communication. I'm Faven Abera. I'm the social media manager of the Jackson Park Project, and thank you for watching.